An independent editorial defense analysis focused on Australia's strategic environment.
The silhouette of HMAS Toowoomba berthing in Jakarta on February 10, 2026, offers a stark visual representation. It is a representation of the transitional fragility currently defining Australian naval power. While the successful transit of the South China Sea demonstrates the professional competence of the Royal Australian Navy, the reliance on a platform commissioned more than 2 decades ago to project influence in one of the world's most contested maritime environments underscores a critical stress test. It is a test of the fleet's structural integrity. This deployment should be viewed not merely as a diplomatic gesture. Instead, it serves as a forceful illustration of the capability gap that exists between the fading operational life of the Anzac-class and the pending arrival of the Tier 2 general-purpose frigates based on the Japanese Mogami design. The operational reality of deploying HMAS Toowoomba reveals the compounding costs of maintaining legacy systems beyond their optimal service life. Despite the extensive upgrades under the Anzac Midlife Capability Assurance Program, which injected significant lethality into the class via upgraded radar and missile integration, the underlying platform remains a product of 1990s naval architecture. Material fatigue in the hull and propulsion systems introduces a nonlinear relationship between maintenance hours and time at sea. Industry data suggests that the cost of sustaining these aging vessels is escalating at a rate of roughly 10 to 15% annually. This is a financial burden that diverts resources from future acquisition programs. The deployment to Jakarta serves as a validation of the fleet's readiness, but it also highlights the precarious nature of relying on assets that require increasingly frequent and prolonged deep maintenance periods to remain seaworthy. This structural fragility is further complicated by the demographic realities facing the Australian Defence Force. The Anzac-class requires a complement of approximately 170 personnel to operate effectively. In the context of a sustained recruitment and retention deficit estimated to be in the range of 800 to 1,000 technical personnel across the service, the human resource requirement of these legacy ships has become a strategic liability. This stands in sharp contrast to the operational concept of the incoming Mogami-derived frigates. These vessels leverage high degrees of automation to reduce the standard crew requirement to approximately 90 personnel. The transition to the new class is therefore not simply a matter of upgrading sensors or weaponry. It is a systemic necessity driven by the unavailability of the human capital required to man older, labor-intensive platforms. The strain on the crew of HMAS Toowoomba during high-tempo operations in the South China Sea accentuates the urgency of this demographic correction. From a geopolitical perspective, the utilization of Jakarta as a logistical node following a South China Sea transit indicates a shift in the way Australia conceives of its northern maritime periphery. The endurance limitations of the Anzac-class, unlike the nuclear-powered submarines envisioned under AUKUS, require reliable access to forward victualling and refueling points. The port call suggests that the relationship with Indonesia is evolving from one of diplomatic cooperation to one of logistical interdependence. For the Australian surface fleet to maintain a persistent presence in the archipelago and beyond, access to Indonesian infrastructure is becoming an operational prerequisite rather than a diplomatic luxury. This creates a complex dynamic where the operational reach of the Royal Australian Navy is increasingly tethered to the political stability and permissiveness of Jakarta. It introduces a variable of diplomatic risk into naval planning. The capability gap, often referred to in defense circles as the Valley of Death, is most acute in the period between 2026 and 2029. The decision to accelerate the acquisition of the Mogami design reflects an acknowledgement that the Anzac-class cannot bridge this gap alone without risking a catastrophic failure of availability. While the Anzac-class excels in traditional domains such as anti-submarine warfare, it lacks the multi-domain integration and stealth characteristics required to survive in a modern anti-access and area denial environment. The Mogami design introduces capabilities such as advanced mine warfare and unmanned system integration that are absent in the current fleet. By continuing to push vessels like HMAS Toowoomba into forward areas, planners are accepting a calculated risk that the strategic environment will not deteriorate faster than the industrial capacity can deliver the replacement hulls. Furthermore, the industrial implications of this transition are manifesting in the tension between the speed of delivery and domestic manufacturing mandates. The expedited procurement strategy for the initial batch of Tier 2 combatants prioritizes the immediate mitigation of the capability gap over the traditional Australian preference for local build programs. This suggests a doctrinal shift where strategic urgency overrides industrial protectionism. The operational data gathered from HMAS Toowoomba's current deployment likely reinforces the argument that waiting for a domestic build capability to mature would leave the fleet dangerously under-resourced in the near term. The trade-off is clear. Australia secures immediate naval mass and modernization at the cost of deferring the development of sovereign shipbuilding sovereignty for this specific class of vessel. The intersection of these factors paints a picture of a Navy in a delicate state of metamorphosis. The Anzac-class is performing its final major act of deterrence, holding the line while the institutional architecture of the Navy is redesigned around the incoming capabilities. The visit to Jakarta is symbolic of a broader strategy to buy time and space. And it involves leveraging alliances and partnerships to compensate for the material limitations of an aging fleet. It demonstrates that while the hardware may be dated, the strategic intent remains ambitious. However, the reliance on legacy platforms imposes strict ceilings on the duration and intensity of operations that can be sustained. Ultimately, the deployment of HMAS Toowoomba is a testament to the resilience of the personnel and the engineering support networks that keep these ships sailing. But it simultaneously exposes the brittleness of the current force structure. The transition to the Mogami-class is not merely an upgrade, it is a rescue operation for the surface fleet's viability. Until the new keels are in the water and the automated systems are fully integrated into the Australian order of battle, the Royal Australian Navy will continue to operate with a shrinking margin for error. The strategic balance in the region is shifting rapidly, and the ability of the old guard to maintain a credible posture is diminishing with every nautical mile steamed. The effectiveness of Australia's maritime strategy in the coming decade will depend entirely on how efficiently this precarious handover between the generations of steel is managed.